Welcome everyone. My name is Titiaan Keijzer. I'm a PhD candidate from Erasmus School of Law of the Netherlands. Many thanks to the organizational committee for inviting me. Obviously I'm slightly disappointed that I cannot be there with you in person, but nevertheless I'm very much looking forward to discussing my research with you through this video. The topic of this video is stock index composition versus shareholder voting rights, and in those few minutes I will try to explain why this is just such a relevant topic these days. So the first building block is stock index composition. And what does this really mean? Well, if you want to invest in the stock market, there's various strategies for selecting the company you want to invest your money in. One of them, for example, is value investing. So you try to identify companies which are actually a bit out of favor with the investment market community and which may therefore be trading below their intrinsic value. Another approach is momentum investing, and basically the opposite, and this involves analyzing stocks which are considered hot by the investing community, and both strategies may produce a return on your investment, but what becomes increasingly evident is that active investing, so trying to identify individual companies to deliver returns, is a very complicated strategy for most investors. So obviously there are some exceptions, but for a majority of the investors, achieving a return that exceeds that of the general market for an extended period of time is very difficult because of a host of psychological factors. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is actually quite simple. Trim down your ambitions, and investors are doing this by adopting a technique called passive investing, and this is where the index kicks in. So if you have an index such as the S&P 500 or the Russell 2000 in the United States, this basically includes all companies listed in a certain country, and as a result you do not buy stocks in one or two individual companies, but you buy a tiny proportion of stocks in all those 500 or 2000 companies. So your investment is much more diversified, and importantly this index investing or passive investing has grown considerably in the last couple of years. So there's really a shift going on towards passive investing. The second building block is dual class stock. As a default, you have every share that grants its holder a right to vote. So if you have one share, you have one vote. If you have 10 shares, you have 10 votes. And as a result, decision making at the public company is democratic, because the majority of the equity gets the decision it wants. However, if you look at, for example, Google or Facebook or Snapchat, you see that these companies have implemented a dual class structure. So what does this mean? It means that certain parties, like the founders or other inside investors, they have shares which grant maybe one, but more likely 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 votes per share. Whereas outside parties, common shareholders, they have a class of stock which only grants them one share or even no vote at all. So there's a distinction between two classes of stock which carry different voting rights. One class of stock carries superior voting rights, one class of stock carrying inferior voting rights. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, depends on how you see it. It may allow companies to implement their unique vision, the unique vision of a corporate founder, or be quicker in implementing a strategy. It also means that the insiders are not accountable or less accountable to outside common shareholders. So there's advantages and disadvantages. Recent evidence, also empirical evidence, suggests that for younger, mature companies, dual class structures actually can be highly beneficial, because they can grow quicker, they can implement faster, they can execute faster. Whereas for more mature companies, dual class structures are actually a bit of a drag on the stock price because of the lack of accountability. This is called a life cycle perspective. So the life cycle perspective is not radically in favor or against dual class structures, but adopts them, sees them with a bit more nuance into it. So where do index composition and dual class stock meet? Well, they actually met in 2017. Sorry. So in 2017, Snapchat conducted its IPO. Initial public offering, became a publicly listed company, and it only offered non-voting shares to the investing public. So if you wanted to buy a share, you could, but you could only buy shares which lacked voting rights. This created discontent, particularly under institutional investors, so pension funds, insurance companies, and they requested the composers of index stock indexes to consider the place of dual class companies in stock indexes. And as a result, there was a bit of a consultation, but as a result of these procedures, dual class companies were either banned from stock indexes, or their importance was reduced, so their relative weight as part of the index was reduced. And my argument actually is that this is a bad thing, for two main reasons. One is that if you start to exclude individual companies from the stock index, you actually violate the very heart of indexing theory, which basically states, okay, we put all listed companies together, put them into an index, and see what happens, because we cannot we cannot with certainty foresee which companies are going to fail and which ones are going to succeed. So by excluding individual companies, you violate the very heart of index investing theory. This is theory, but there's also a more practical aspect, namely that it costs investors money. Because from a life cycle perspective, it can be argued that the existence of a dual class is basically a signal that a company has entered a phase of rapid growth. So this will usually translate into rapid growth of sales, rapid growth of profit, and this will also translate in stock prices. So if you deny index investors those dual class companies, they basically miss out on the associated profits and the associated gains in share price value. I think there could be, if you have a dual class company inside a stock index, there could be a problem eventually if the company gets more mature, but I think that's a problem that should be solved ex post, so at the end, by maybe removing the company from the stock index, instead of denying the company access from the stock index up front. So there's a difference between ex ante and ex post perspectives here. But this is just my 2 cents. Obviously, I'm very much interested in your comments as well and your suggestions. So I have 3 questions for you. One, what do you think the role of index composers should be? Should they be more passive, or perhaps also because of environmental, social factors, should they take a more active stance? Second, do you see any alternatives in the stock market to stimulate innovation, alternatives to dual class mechanisms, or do you think that this is the most appropriate instrument to that end? And thirdly, do you think that sunset provisions should become mandatory? Sunset provisions, I will elaborate a little bit, they basically provide that that dual class mechanisms will be repealed after a fixed period of time. So this could be 5 years, it could be 20 years, it could be 10 years, anything in between. But the cancellation of a dual class structure is fixed in advance. In a basic form, it kind of matches the life cycle perspective, but there's maybe also a bit of a blunt mechanism to fix the term in advance. So I'm particularly interested in hearing your views on that matter. With these three questions, I would like to finish my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'd love to hear from you.